today with a very special guest. This is Maria Kay, and she's a very talented author, and she has decided to come on here and do a very special subscriber story time, and she's going to tell us one of her original stories. Sarah, I'm just going to hand it over to her.
This story, Whispers in the Mist, frustrates other people because I literally sat down and wrote it in like 25 minutes because I was bored doing projects.
I wish I had that
challenge. And I just decided to write a story because I had nothing better to do. So it doesn't always happen like that. And it is a tribute to one of my favorite kind of weird otherworldly stories by Judith Tarr, Death and the Lady. Hers happens in I think 14th century France during one of the big plagues. Yeah, and mine happens in this day and age in North Carolina. So, but I definitely borrowed the idea from her. Okay. It is called Whispers in the Mist. It was one of those stupid arguments even smart people sometimes have. In fact, because smart people don't have them all that often, such altercations invariably end up being more explosive. David and I were camping, trying to catch the last of the not too chilly weather in the leaf season. When packing, we had opted for our small pop-up camper instead of the tent, just snug enough to negotiate the fine line between the mellow daytime and the rapidly cooling nights, with traces of that distinctive winter bite typical for the late fall in the North Carolina mountains. The hubbub began over whether or not to leave one of the camper windows open overnight. As it always happens in such cases, neither one of us knew how such a trifling matter escalated into explosive dispute over the merits of everything from this camping trip to our 17-year-long marriage. Both of us were to blame and quickly reached that point of immature tiff where one can't think of a single intelligent, sensible thing to say. Nemo, our basset hound, crawled under a bunk and whimpered from under there, so I went for a walk. Even as I followed the narrow, mossy path leading from the campground to a wide loop circling the waterfall, one of 260-something waterfalls western North Carolina is famous for, I already started regaining bits and pieces of my common sense, thinking how, in general, David and I hardly ever had an argument. First of all, our tastes were too alike to have a lot of disagreements, and second, we've had too much experience debating in our professional lives. We could always work things out. It was foggy. The mist settling so thickly I could no longer see the light of the camper. I knew this path well, yet I was startled how unfamiliar it suddenly looked. My eyes no longer able to pick out the familiar landmarks, the rocks and trees either completely obscured or distorted to a point of being unrecognizable. Between having to pay attention to my footing and squinting through the murk, the shift came so subtly it took me a few minutes to realize where I was and was not. It was like one of those times driving from work when the last thing you remember is leaving the parking lot at your office and then you're suddenly in your driveway at home. Not that this was home. Not anymore. The circle still looked the same, its stones as crumbling and mossy as ever. I'd seen them many times in my long-lost past, and a handful of times in my present life, and they were always crumbling and mossy, no less, no more. No additional pieces had fallen off in as long as I could remember, and none were added back in an attempt to repair them. The spots of moss and lichen were exactly the same size, shape, and color as I remembered them. They did not shrivel and die, and no new growth appeared. I wasn't frightened, not even when they finally spoke up. "Greetings, Golden Lady." "Greetings. You come alone?" "I suppose I do. I did not intend to come at all." "Ah, but the shift is not a matter of obvious intention. You came because this is your place at present." "Yes, at present, and it is bound to change in the near future." "Perhaps, Golden Lady, perhaps." I chuckled. They never missed an opportunity to talk me into staying. There were times when I was tempted, in the great city of many columns and statues of bulls, as it burned, its silver roofs melting and pouring to the ground like rivers of moonlight. They said a woman had set it on fire, and deservedly so. Perhaps. I did not know why as I stood atop a hill gazing at the flames and pools of molten silver. It's been home, another home that was no more. In the Alps, when the great beasts came and armies clashed. In another city, when flames rose once again, except they weren't burning in protest but out of fear, and it wasn't the city that was burning but some of its people. They were times. When I became pregnant all those years ago, and David was so happy and excited, and I miscarried after only 10 weeks, I wanted to find the circle and shift, but not to seek solace. I wanted to light fires, like that other woman who burned the city of many columns, because I knew. They spoke to me. No, golden lady, not this child, not into this world. You have made your choice. And that was when the small life ended before it even began. I wondered then, and I wondered still, why they would have tried to make me stay had I done what I wanted. Or had they hoped I would stay because David and I would not make it through the grief together. Mist boiled within the circle, now lit from within by fireflies. Impossible in late October, but not here. Your lord has upset you, lady. No, we upset each other in a stupid way. You walked away. Yes, because I already knew it was stupid and I needed to stop. But if you go back, it will happen again. Yes, probably. What you don't understand is such things are not only infrequent, they're inconsequential. It might happen, but it doesn't matter. I could almost not see but rather sense them in the mist. Their graceful shapes, faces in every shade of gold, from glowing pale to bright copper, large, luminous eyes. Some of them were almost mirror images of me. Golden skin, reddish bronze hair, light brown, almost yellow eyes. They gazed back at me, haughty as ever, not asking me to stay, but telling me why I should. We are your people, lady. So you are. I even love you, in a way. But you have been trapped in the mists behind the circle for too long. You are isolated and drifting further and further away. And after all this time of watching and waiting, you still do not understand humans at all. And you do. Not always. Not entirely. But I stay and I try. And when I lose them, I stay and try again. You inflicted pain upon one another over an opening in the wall. Yes, we did. But that kind of pain is nothing compared to what we have. Or, for that matter, compared to the pain you inflicted upon me and the others like me for not staying. We meant no harm. Of course not. You meant for what you have to stay intact, the way it was before time was time, like the stones that make up the circle. I turned away from the crumbling, lichen-covered ruins. Shifting toward them had always been easy, nearly imperceptible. Shifting away from them was another matter. It was not impossible, but they wanted it to hurt. I wondered briefly whether humans who had shifted out of the ordinary world were ever able to go back when they realized an overwhelming nature of them, with their brilliance and madness. Or whether the pain was too much for anyone not of my ilk, and they remained trapped forever. I was standing there, my jaws and fists still clenched, tears stinging my eyes, but I knew I was back on the familiar path, now barely visible in the approaching twilight. I resolutely walked back to the campground, still sensing their tug at the back of my mind, almost like a physical pull drawing me backwards. A coil of mist suddenly receded from a gust of wind, and I saw one of the landmarks at the halfway point. A large boulder with dramatic white, red, and black striations. David was sitting on it, Nemo next to him. "Hey," he said, "I made some rice and hot sandwiches. I thought you would want them before they get cold, so I came to get you." He was nothing like my people. He was broad and craggy and always joked about having 2 left feet. His skin was dark ebony topped with a snowy cap of short, curly hair. But his eyes were as large and luminous as any of them might have, and the color of liquid silver I remembered so well. All the more beautiful because they could express kindness and love, even when we argued. How did you know which way I went? I asked. The path branched out several times, offering 5 or 6 different approaches to the falls. I didn't. Nemo did. I just followed him. And then we decided to take a break, and you show up. Right. He held out his hand, and I took it. We walked back to the campground together, carefully stepping over bare roots and loose rocks. Occasionally, Nemo paused and sniffed loudly at the mist, snorted and shook his head as if chasing away a fly. A spot of faint orange light appeared through the fog. It wasn't particularly bright, but familiar, warm, and reassuring. Our camping lantern. The tugging in my mind had stopped. The end.
25 minutes? 20 people. Who else wants to know, like, the backstory on this woman? Like, that's the first thing that I wrote her when she sent me the story ahead of time and I read it. I was like, I want to read all the novels. Like, where are they? Thumbs up if she should write about this lady. But seriously, I mean, 25 minutes to write that. That's just, that blows my mind.
Yeah, it was fun, and it happens that way sometimes. I started writing very, very young. Loved writing letters, compositions. Then I stopped after my mother died, and I didn't think I would start again. And then, something like 16 or 17 years later, I started again and have been writing ever since. So I've been out of the writing hiatus for like 14 years now. So, and I think I am very influenced all the time because I read a ton. I read a ton of sci-fi fantasies specifically. So invariably I'm going to be influenced.
Those are the best books to read, right?
Yeah, they are, you know, and it's so hard to say anything new because there's so many great books and so many great writers. But it's fun when sort of a story comes together in your head and you just... One of the references in the story, there's references to multiple periods in human history. One of the references actually is to another book, and that was a translation, one of the first serious translations I've done. It is the novel, historic novel, Thais of Athens, by Ivan Yefremov. And Thais was this very interesting woman, and she was actually close friends with Alexander the Great, and she followed the army when Alexander the Great ventured out into Persia to basically invade Persia in revenge for invading Greece before, so good times. And so when they came to the capital of Persia, Persepolis, she was so outraged that there were no statues of women, no images of women anywhere. There were these palaces that made one very confused and disoriented because they loved multiple columns. So there was a hall of 70 columns, the hall of 150 columns, and you just wandered around there. And the only statues and images and bare leaves she saw in the city was of the kings, and kings in the shape of bulls, because that was their sacred animal. And she said to Alexander the Great, I think this city should not exist. It worships all the wrong things. It worships humiliation and male dominance and hatred of women and hatred of things beautiful because there was no other expression of beauty. And so she burned it down with him. She started the fire. So that's an actual historic incident. And the rivers of silver were because Persian royalty liked having silver roofs. And silver, of course, has a very low melting point. So as soon as the fire flared up, the silver roof started melting and pouring down into the dust in these rivers of silver, and that really stuck with me.
That's so interesting. I love that you know the background stories, like knowing where something came from and how it influenced the writing is so super interesting.
Yeah, it's fun. So the fact that I have one sentence in this, and this is what I liked about this, I had one sentence, and when I wrote that sentence, that whole story just popped into my head. You know, this enormous book and this enormous epic sort of incident in history. That was fun.
Well, thanks for coming and
so
sharing on
much.
the channel. Oh, and by the way, guys, she just started her channel. You're into mostly gaming, right?
Yeah, my channel is game streaming gaming. There's 2 distinct groups of games. One is hidden object adventure.
Ooh.
Yeah, like dark, and I noticed I have a very dark streak. It's dark tales, dark parables, haunted tales. I just started haunted halls, dark romance. There's dark, dark, dark haunted, dark, dark cursed. You know.
What can I say? We're into paranormal
Yeah,
over here.
So it's all very, very like that. And then another one is the one I do with my husband. That is it's a RPG, kill 'em, shoot 'em up, which is Path of Exile, which is also very dark, because basically you're an exiled supernatural character. You could be a sorcerer, a witch, a barbarian who's committed some horrible acts apparently, and you wake up on the shore of the sea, completely defenseless, and you like have to defend yourself with your own fists.
Okay.
So that's fun. So that's Angry Hobbit.
And we'll link that in the description box below, so
fun.
make sure you go down there. And if you want Maria to share more of her stories, or if you have any questions about writing, getting into writing, about her story in general, please leave a comment down below. I will make sure that she sees those comments, and then we can answer you as best as possible.
Thank you.
So yeah, I think that's it for story time today. All of my social media will be at the end of the video, so make sure you stick around for that. And my Gmail will be in the description box below. So if you do have a story time that you would like me to tell, whether it is fiction or fact, I'm up for both. Please just write me an email, and if you would like to stay anonymous, let me know in the email. I won't share anything without your permission, so if you just have something you want to tell and ask me about, that's fine as well. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for us, and we will see you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.